Good day to everyone joining us, and welcome to today's X Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled Oncology Product Launch, the Toolkit for Success. My name is Sonia Hunt, and it's my pleasure to be your X Talks moderator for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes. This presentation includes a Q&A session with our speakers. This webinar is designed to be interactive, and webinars work best when you're involved. So please feel free to submit questions and comments for our speakers throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. Now, this chat box is located in the control panel, and that's found on the right-hand side of your screen. If you require assistance, please do not hesitate to contact me by using that chat panel. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. Please note that this event will be recorded and made available to you for future streaming on xtalks.com. At this point, I'd like to thank Herspiegel Consulting, who developed the content for this presentation. Herspiegel Consulting specializes in pharmaceutical and biotech commercialization, helping clients in with strategy through execution in 5 core service areas of new product planning, marketing, launch readiness, medical affairs, and market access. They offer integrative, tailored consulting services to meet your brand and business needs. Their diverse team brings experience from over 65 product launches, strategy and innovation leadership, and executional support for startup to large pharma clients. They have experience across a wide variety of therapeutic areas, including oncology, rare disease, metabolic disease, CNS, women's health, and others. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce you to your speakers for today's event. And first, I'd like to introduce you to Vivian Ho, manager at Herspiegel Consulting. Vivian has extensive experience in pharmaceutical commercializations, concluding product launches and executional contact development projects. And our second speaker is Swati Rangan, senior manager with Herspiegel Consulting. She is a skilled strategist with comprehensive therapeutic and functional expertise, spanning complexities throughout the product commercialization process. And now I'd like to introduce you to your third speaker, and that is Ann Brooks, Vice President of Marketing at Iovance Biotherapeutics, Inc. She is a biopharmaceutical commercial executive with a proven track record of building blockbuster pharmaceutical brands and franchises in multiple categories, including oncology, virology, pain, and neuroscience. Her experience includes lifecycle strategic planning and portfolio management for many U.S. product launches and global positioning and branding. And now I will pass over the controls and the mic to Ann. So Ann, when you're ready, you may begin.
Great, thank you very much, Sonia, and welcome everyone to our discussion about oncology product launch. I know this is a topic that is very much of interest to many people within the industry, as oncology continues to be one of the highest unmet needs in healthcare today. And when we think back to the opportunities that we have working in the pharma and biotech industries, you know, we have a real responsibility to bring innovative products to patients who need these treatments so desperately. I'm really looking forward to sharing my own personal experiences working in oncology, as well as some of the insights from my colleagues Vivian and Swati. I think this is going to be a terrific presentation over the next hour. So a little bit about my background. As Sonia mentioned, you know, I have been in the industry for nearly 20 years, and over half of that have been in oncology. I've launched 8 products. We're currently working on my 9th in cell therapy. And in the oncology realm, I've had a chance to work in products for solid tumors, heme malignancies, as well as supportive care. And each one of those products has been really unique in terms of what it offers to patients with cancer and the unmet needs in the marketplace. So taking a look back at the history of cancer treatment, it seems hard to believe that really cancer treatment was only started, over a little over, obviously 100 years ago, and it was really just limited to radiation to be used to treat cancer. And that the first chemotherapy was not approved until 1949, which again, not that long ago. But to think that having gone from just chemotherapy as a treatment for cancer where we are today is truly astounding. Within a decade after the first chemotherapy approval, there were studies to prove that combination chemotherapy was a more effective way of treating tumors. Moving then a couple decades later, looking at combination of both chemo and radiation. But then now the introduction of oral chemotherapy, so not just injectable cytotoxic chemotherapy, but now oral chemotherapies. Fast forward then to the end of the 90s decade, you now see targeted therapies. So with 1997, the approval of rituximab targeting CD20 really opened the door to a whole new realm of targeted therapies for treating cancer, which held the promise of the potential of reducing toxicity and enhancing efficacy with the having much more laser-focused targeting approach. Then moving into the not decade, you started to see again even more targeted therapies with the first anti-angiogenic drug approved, which was Avastin or bevacizumab. I had the pleasure of launching Erbitux, which was a similar drug targeting EGFR for metastatic colorectal cancer. It was a very exciting time to be in this industry. Then fast forward to the promise of immunotherapy. So in 2014, we saw the ushering in of a really exciting opportunity and shift in treating cancer with immunotherapies, and with in 2014 the launch of ipilimumab or Yervoy. And since then, there have been several checkpoint inhibitors that have launched and made tremendous impact in the marketplace. Nivolumab, pembrolizumab, and many others, really harnessing the power of the patient's immune system to treat their cancer. And now looking forward, starting in 2017 and now beyond, we're now seeing gene and cell therapies really taking flight in treating oncology. In 2017, we saw the approval of 2 CAR T therapies, and there are more to come. So it's a very exciting time to be in oncology, and I think there have been lessons learned along the way and new challenges with these new products that we have the pleasure and the privilege of bringing to our patients who desperately need them. So I'll turn the presentation over to my colleagues at Hirschspiegel to take us forward into our discussion.
Perfect. Thank you, Anne. If we can go to the next slide. Great. So as you can see, and as you've heard from Anne as well, oncology is a huge market that is constantly growing. I would actually argue that it's probably the most complex therapeutic area to focus within. There's a great deal of unmet need where patients really need those significant options. And in fact, oncology is the one therapeutic area that's consistently having the largest percentage of FDA approvals now every year. And as you know, there's an increase of approvals, but there's also naturally an increase of competition and options in some of these areas. So when we're seeing greater competition and options, and as the space becomes more and more familiar, there's really, this kind of sets the stage for a very targeted strategy that has to be developed and centered around unique differentiators and unique value as it relates to an oncology launch. You can have the most efficacious products, but without education and access, it becomes nearly impossible to successfully launch. So what we kind of like to do over the next 40 minutes or so is take everyone through some of the lessons that we've learned as it relates to oncology launches. What are some of the unique parameters, and how can we set you up for success? So if we can go to the next slide. Those are kind of our 3 key areas for today, right? We'd like to walk you through, obviously, the concept of a launch, the launch phase of our product life cycle, what to consider for oncology. And as we know, oncology is very specific versus other therapeutic areas. So we'd like to take you through some of our learnings and unique differentiators as it relates to oncology. We'll look at areas such as therapeutic innovation, access, digital health, and some of those other significant parameters that we think are very beneficial and very unique to this therapeutic area. And then finally, we'll close out the session on some key nuggets around how to appropriately de-risk and accelerate your launch. How do you successfully pull a launch plan together? What are some areas to watch out for? The goal for any product is really to have a strong and solid launch strategy, and we hope that with this presentation, you're able to take away some key nuggets and key pieces from this talk to help bolster your goals. With the next slide, we'll really get into the first phase of our presentation, which is sort of the launch phase of product lifecycle. And with the following slide, we'd really like to set the stage for this entire presentation around what the product lifecycle really looks like. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Great. It's really critical to understand that when you're preparing for a launch, you're really setting the stage for the future success of the brand as well. One key aspect for oncology launches is preparing for label expansions. Are there any future indications that you are pursuing that would absolutely impact your launch strategy? For example, you have Keytruda, which has over 22, I think, indications, several in combination therapies as well. So these are all things that brand teams need to consider as part of their initial product launch strategy. When planning for a launch, it's really imperative to think about what it'll take to be successful, as great products do not just sell themselves. Appropriate planning is needed, appropriate foresight is required, and in oncology, great products are not easy to come by. As you can see in the next slide, we kind of set the stage for the oncology market itself, and that oncology is very challenging as a therapeutic market. Clinically speaking alone, there are still new discoveries every day about various tumor types, and we're still at the stage where advancement means survival over other therapeutic areas where advancements might mean mode of delivery. So unmet need here is really quite impactful. We see that the overall success rates for oncology phase transitions is merely 3.4%, whereas in other areas, it can be close to 20 to 21%. So it's really impactful and really essential to get things right with oncology. Success is highly challenging. So when you're presented with positive data, the stakes are even higher to ensure that you're getting it right. On the next slide, Vivian will take us through what this increasing pressure really means and what it really takes to get things right.
Yeah, thanks, Swathi. So as we saw earlier from Anne and from Swathi, oncology is an area that is growing and innovating very rapidly. And because of this increase in approved therapies in specific tumor types and indications, we're seeing now the emergence of access hurdles and pricing pressure. So that's one area where this increase in competition and innovation, has really impacted some of the access expectations that teams will be facing. Swathi will speak to this in more detail later, but it shows some of the challenges that are faced in this environment. Additionally, in our industry, we see decreased budgets, we see impact to headcounts, and we see, there are more frequent launches that are expected from teams that are balancing sometimes, an existing product along with a launch that's coming up. So there's high competition and competitive pressure there that are pushing down on some of these resource constraints. And even though oncology was once seen as almost a traditional protected area and there were kind of easy paths to approval, that's changing. And oncology launches require strong strategies and sophisticated execution to, what we would say, get it right. And despite all of the competition and growth that we do see, on the other hand, oncology is still an area where there is a significant unmet need. As Anne mentioned, these patients are facing a life-threatening disease. It puts pressure on to ensure that we can bring those therapeutic options to the market, that we educate stakeholders on new mechanisms of action, and that we can help our clinicians and our patients be able to be identified to get the correct therapy to the correct population. This, high unmet need drives some of our regulatory bodies to assist in that path to market. We'll talk about some of that going forward. And you can see as we go into the next slide, we've offered some outline of the expedited programs that are offered by the FDA on the left here on the slide. So there's a variety of expedited programs that apply to many of the innovative and exciting new oncologic therapies that are in development. accelerated approval and some of these special designations like breakthrough designation or fast track designations, these often do apply to oncology assets, and when applied for, they receive them. Assets in these FDA expedited programs can be approved after submission in only 3 to 5 months. You can see some of the examples on the right where Tecentriq, it was 3 months from submission to approval, ibrutinib 4 months, Ibrance 5 months. You know, the FDA is really making efforts to streamline those processes, understanding the unmet need for cancer patients in the market, and they need options, and they need options quickly. The final bullet point on the left there shows that the FDA is currently piloting a program called the Oncology Center of Excellence Real-Time Oncology Review. It's a pilot where they are hoping to, you know, try a more efficient review process specifically for oncology. It shows the importance of getting access to assets to market for these patients. So what does this mean for launching in this space? It means oncology launches really have to scenario plan for rapid timeframes, and that there are multiple paths to approval. These launches should be agile. You have to have deep cross-functional strategy and foresight and planning. You'll need to understand how to balance a manufacturing need for a 12-month stability assay with early medical education and market shaping, you know, as well as ensuring that your sales team is well trained and ready to go at the time of launch. It can be very challenging to balance a lot of these tactics that need to be completed for a successful launch. So we will be discussing more of these aspects later. And we'll talk about, you know, some of the ways to scenario plan and mitigate for some of these risks. Right now, we'd like to move into a group polling question. So Sonia, please help us with that.
Definitely, I can help you with that. Yes, it is our first poll question, and I'm going to launch it right now. So it should appear on your screen, and there it is. So please go ahead and cast your vote. You'll see that this is done in real time, so I'll be able to share the results with you once I close the polls, which I will do in about 40 seconds. Okay, so the question is for the poll, as you see before you, what drives your interest in oncology launch planning? Again, the question is, what drives your interest in oncology launch planning? And you have 5 to select from below. I'm in the industry role and in the middle of planning a launch, or I'm in an industry role and about to start planning a launch. The next option is I am in an industry role and just launched the product, or I am a vendor supporting launches, or I'm just curious. So please go ahead and cast your vote. And it looks like we have the majority of our members in the audience have done so. So I thank you for that. For those of you who have not, can you go ahead and do so? I'll give you another 10 seconds, and then I will close the polls and share the results. Okay, looks like everyone has done so. Thank you very much, everyone. I'm now going to close the poll and share the results. Okay, so the question again was, what drives your interest in oncology launch planning? And we have 19% at I'm in an industry role and in the middle of planning a launch. We have 27% at I'm in the industry role and about to start planning a launch. And then we have 3% at I'm an industry role and just launched the product. And then we have 22% at I am a vendor supporting launches and 30% at I'm just curious. So thank you everyone for participating in that last poll. Now back to Vivian.
Thank you, Sonia, and thank you everyone for your answers. Given that quite a few of you are in the middle of planning on the launch and thinking about planning on the launch, we're hoping that this next section can really help to advise you of some of the unique needs of oncology launches. So if we move on to the next slide, you'll see that we've broken this up into 5 major areas. I'm pretty sure Anne and Swati and I could probably teach a course just on the unique needs of oncology launches, but we've decided to focus on data generation, as well as some of the specific customer engagements that are needed within oncology. We'll also review some of the therapeutic innovations in oncology, where there are many areas that have seen, really interesting and different, therapeutics that are quite unique to this space. We'll also touch on diagnostics there, and we'll speak to some of the unique needs of cell therapies. And then the final two areas of digital advancement and access distribution, Swathi will go over, this digital health and digital advancements and this growing area in healthcare, and what impact will that have in the oncology space? And what are those challenges in access that we're seeing, and how can we address them in our launches? So let's jump into data generation. So as we have emphasized, oncology is an increasingly competitive marketplace. We need to be able to use the tools that are available, and it's really key for efficiency and speed to market if that strategy and planning takes place early on. So you'll see in the next slide, we have an example of excellent use of data planning and lifecycle management. So as part of asset strategy, understanding the product portfolio and the clinical value is critical to developing strong data generation plans. Understanding that registrational data can be supplemented with real-world evidence and be used for rapid approval is necessary to know for the oncology space. We can see that early and effective HEOR data generation, post-marketing plans for data generation for label expansion can be achieved, and can be achieved in a very efficient manner. And you can see on the example on the right here, something where it was done, very well. So Ibrance was approved in 2015. They received accelerated approval in 2015 for their combination with letrozole in first line for ER positive and HER2 negative metastatic breast cancer. And it actually helps us to exemplify some of those rapid timeframes that we referenced earlier. Ibrance was then given regular approval in 2017. So if they had not received that accelerated approval, their regular approval was 2 years later. But during that time, they were able to collect real-world data from EHRs, from electronic health records, and this supported a supplemental NDA application for label expansion in combination with endocrine therapy, specifically for male breast cancer patients. And as people may be aware, the male population is just not as affected by breast cancer and has much lower rates than females for breast cancer. So I think you can appreciate here that a phase 3 trial for male breast cancer patients would enroll quite slowly. And if they had not used this plan for data generation, their approval for male breast cancer patients for that label expansion would have been much further delayed. So executing something like this requires, working with centers of excellence, having relationship with oncology networks, and, ensuring that you have appropriate data access and what data is available as it relates to what your product may need and as it relates to what patients may need. In this case, it led to label expansion. But, this overall just takes a lot of planning and effort and foresight, but it just has such great benefits for the brand as well as for patients who have, earlier access to the medication that they need. So if we move on to the next section here, we'd like to talk a little bit more about customer engagement in oncology. There's a lot of intricacies here, and as we move on to the next slide, what we've pulled together is a kind of simplified patient journey. You can see that this slide is pretty busy. I just said it was simplified, but there's a lot going on here, and that's purposeful. It really reflects the many customers who are involved in the patient journey in oncology. Each of these stakeholders have different needs. Not only do they have different needs, but their needs change as they move from diagnosis to the treatment decision to the treatment follow-up. Each group has different educational gaps in each of these stages. Those have to be identified. They have to be met. This will require, market research. It will require insights from our field teams to be collected. All of those insights need to be, incorporated and used in some of our strategy development. Launch teams may, find that they'll need to develop different messages for each of these groups. And, each of these groups actually will require individual messaging. And, understanding that cancer can be, such a burden, and knowing that the patients and the caregivers are really undergoing something that they may have never dealt with before, it's a great time to also talk about what we can offer with patient support programs here. How can we support our stakeholders who are oncology patients with reimbursement for travel, or creating infusion center locator tools so that they understand where they can go for their infusions. It's very important for patients. We've heard this again and again from speaking to patients that they need a lot of support with reimbursement and access. Some of these oncology products do have very high price points, and ensuring that office managers and that, other options for understanding that reimbursement and access needs are given is very important. Nurse educators play a significant role in this pathway. Developing appropriate nurse education can help patients and their caregivers understand how to deal with some of the challenges of cancer drug side effects. This is actually important for cancer supportive care therapies, we don't think about them as direct oncology drugs, but cancer supportive care therapies are essential for patients. And, understanding those launches and what they need is important in this arena as well. So how do these stakeholders make treatment decisions? What are they using? Is this different from other areas? I'd like to go to the next slide, where we talk about some of the importance of medical affairs and our medical affairs teams in that medical and clinical education, and in the relationships that need to be built in the oncology space. Oncology is very data-driven. It's very science-driven. Oncologists themselves will look to, MSLs, and look to some of the advocacy organizations and oncology networks for data and information. Medical affairs teams and MSLs are essential to establish that relationship with scientific stakeholders. They can also work with clinicians and oncology centers of excellence. Some of the things that we've highlighted here are things that these medical affairs teams and our field teams really need to focus on. Since oncologists really do use guidelines and are up to date on many scientific publications, a strong gap analysis for publications is needed. Sometimes there are significant, side effect profiles from our products. Will we need a publication specifically addressing how to treat those side effects? Is this something that an oncologist is not used to and will need to refer? How can we make sure that they are fully educated in what they need so that they can be comfortable with prescribing, this new therapy? And when are guidelines updated? Will our publications be ready for the literature review that goes with many of the guideline updates? Planning for that, understanding the timeframes, very important to make sure that your therapy is considered in guidelines. We also are looking to create relationships with KOLs for peer-to-peer engagement, collecting a lot of insight generation on these influential KOLs that can become a champion for, the science behind the product. And our MSLs team, will build those relationships and, help establish some of those needs for the brand in the market. So if we go to the next slide here, we're going to move on to another section that we're calling therapeutic innovations. And in therapeutic innovations, if we go to the next slide, something that's quite important is diagnostics. And oncology assets frequently launch with diagnostics, which brings, unique challenges. I think the emphasis here is that a diagnostic is a launch within a launch. You will be launching your product, but you will also have to launch a diagnostic, and you'll have to understand that landscape. There will need to be a launch plan. identifying those, drivers, barriers, and risks and success factors for that diagnostic is all rolled into, the bigger launch on the whole. Understanding that those are the needs, there are also other aspects such as partnerships. You'll have to partner with a diagnostic manufacturer, and sometimes what works with other pharmaceutical companies does not work with working with biotech. So what are the best practices there with working for biotech? Swathi will be talking about, some of the tips and tricks for working in an alliance or a partnership. So we can look to that later. And then understanding if your organization is ready for diagnostic support, building that infrastructure, and understanding if it's not a companion diagnostic, what a lab developed test may need. And then I'd like to hand it over to Anne to talk a little bit about the challenges and specific needs for cell therapies.
Great. Next slide, please. So yes, I mean, in the context of therapeutic innovations, both in the diagnostic realm, but now as we look toward the growth of cell and gene therapy, this is really is so exciting in terms of the opportunities for patients. When you think about what immuno-oncology has done with the PD-1 and the CTLA-4 inhibitors, we were just already, cutting into the opportunity to really leverage a patient's immune system to treat their cancer. When you think about cell and gene therapy, this is the ultimate in immunotherapy. You're literally creating therapy out of patient's own cells, own immune system to treat their patient, to treat their cancer. But with that incredible opportunity comes a lot of unique challenges and things that we need to think about in industry as we bring a cell therapy to markets. So manufacturing, when you're thinking about manufacturing, this isn't something that, like a small molecule drug or frankly, even a biologic, where you're able to manufacture quantity and keep it in an inventory and leverage wholesalers, all of that sort of distribution and manufacturing thinking sort of goes out the window. It's much, much more challenging and complex and is very much, requiring, good manufacturing processes to ensure, quality manufacture of a patient's cells, whether the cells are simply being grown and augmented or actually genetically engineered before shipping back to the institution to infuse in their patient. Product logistics. So, I mentioned the wholesaler dynamic that's different. That, there's really no need for a wholesaler when the manufacturer is, harnessing the patient's cells and delivering it back to the hospital. So what does that look like? How does product get, shipped to the hospital? Cells have to be collected at a hospital. How does that collection process take place, and how does it get shipped to the manufacturer? That whole back and forth on shipping and receiving is significant. And one of the most significant things that a cell or gene therapy manufacturer has to demonstrate to the FDA is that the patient's cells are never compromised throughout the process, so that we are maintaining a consistent chain of identity of that patient throughout the process, as well as a constant monitoring of the chain of custody, that we are tracking whether the cells are still at the hospital, or they're with a courier, or they're at the manufacturing site, or they're being shipped back. We have to demonstrate to the FDA that we're able to track that in an absolute rigorous process. Because without that proof, we can't actually bring these products to market. It would just be putting patients in obviously a risky situation. So logistics become part of the product essentially. Market education in cell therapy is paramount. So still very much a growing and new field. And there's a lot of, just lack of knowledge, both in the institutions that would be administering cell therapy products, but also, frankly, in the community setting. With most oncology products, patients are able to be treated in their, community clinics whether it's through oral chemotherapies or injectables that are administered on a several week cycle basis. This is something that's brand new, and it's offering a patient a one-time treatment through cell therapy, and that requires a total mind shift on the behalf of our customers to really think differently about what treatment could look like in oncology. So there's an overall educational gap around the opportunity with cell and gene therapy. Similarly, there's a lot of training that's required for any sites that would be administering these cell or gene therapies. And it's not as simple as instructing an oncology nurse on how to infuse a product. There's a lot more that goes into it, and ensuring that training is really comprehensive and documented is also critical. And then finally, just general awareness. I'd say the CAR-Ts have done a good job of building awareness of cell therapy as an option for patients with lymphomas, and particularly with the heme space. But in solid tumors, there's very little to no awareness of cell therapy as an opportunity. So there's a lot of market education that needs to take place for cell therapies to really take off in oncology. Thinking about access, Vivian touched upon this a little bit earlier, but access is getting more and more restricted in oncology. It still is pretty much a covered class, but it's very important for manufacturers to continue to really illustrate to our payers that there's value in these therapies, and there is value in a one-time treatment with a cell or gene therapy. It does come at a certain cost, so there's certain cost of care analyses that need to be illustrated, and really partnering with payers, as well as institutions who would be considering using these therapies. What is the value of using these therapies? And what does that deliver to the patient from an overall cost of care versus the initial expense? And then finally, patient support. So patients really need to be supported as they experience a cell therapy, both before, during, and after treatment. Before, it's about supporting them around being able to handle the cell therapy, both from the generation or the procurement of their cells, through the infusion, and then finally through sort of the support of them completing their therapy. We as manufacturers need to step up and ensure that patients are supported throughout the process. And so it's a critical component of any cell therapy company strategy to be successful, is to make sure that our product, we are thinking patient first, patient forward. So critical. And we need to offer personalized support for such a personalized treatment. So, I'm very fortunate at Iovance to have this opportunity to work in a cell therapy. And we're hoping that, more companies will be able to bring their treatments forward to patients in this really exciting and exploding area of oncology. Next slide, please.
All right, thank you, Anne, for that. And it's really great and timely that we're talking about personalized support, because that's really the crux of a lot of the digital advancements that we're seeing. Over the past several years, the digital world has taken over the pharmaceutical industry by a storm. So we're seeing things like connected devices, telehealth, and wearables all flooding into this marketplace as innovative mechanisms to advance success. And we haven't really seen an accelerated uptake into oncology. So what we want to spend the next few minutes doing is really, what does digital mean for oncology? What are some things to consider? Because it is an area where we need that personalized focus. So as we go into the next slide, we really highlight a few of those key areas that we see digital being, a big component of the oncology marketplace. If we can sort of recall from earlier in this presentation, there's really a high emphasis on data and data generation as it relates to oncology. But how do you ensure that data is accessible for decision making? How do you incorporate technology and digital advancements to be able to do so within the oncology marketplace? It's really essential to ensure that you have these processes in place during the launch planning timeframe so you're able to set up for future success. As we saw earlier, Pfizer was able to use, EHR data for future indications, but you really have to orchestrate these partnerships and set up these data infrastructures ahead of time to get this real-time de-identified patient data and to really utilize this real-world evidence to drive and provide success for the right therapies to the right patient at the right time. So really things like predictive analytics will start to be utilized to shape clinical trials as we plan for success in the future. You'll be able to identify new clinical hypotheses to test. You'll be able to narrow patient populations to subgroups to really find that successful product and make sure that you are holistically patient-centric. On the other side of this slide, we see digital tools more as a mechanism. Oh, if we can go back really quickly. Thank you. So right on the right-hand side of the slide, we see digital tools more as a mechanism to help patients manage their disease and track their outcomes. A good example of this is sort of Pfizer's Living Well platform as a free app, which is intended to provide support across a variety of cancer types. It does things such as providing educational information and integrating with other digital tools such as wearables for patients to be able to track their habits. These types of tools easily depict the longitudinal journey that a patient is having with or without product and can really be useful in making those future informed decisions. This leads to prom, and no, I'm not talking about, the high school dance that we're all remembering, but rather patient-related outcomes measures. These measures are a lot of times utilized by physicians across the oncology networks to help them make decisions as it relates to critical outpatient treatment segments. UTMD Anderson actually ran a study depicting that the use of wearables helped track patient progress within head and neck cancer, and that physicians were able to more effectively plan their treatment pathways. So when we're looking at all of this, ultimately having more data at our fingertips is amazing to measure patient progress. It's amazing to provide for the patient at the end of the day, but it might also lead to that other elephant in the room, which is how does all of this impact access? So in the next slide, in the next set of slides, we're sort of continuing our unique oncology considerations in one of the most important segments, which is really access and distribution. And it's really having to navigate that complex access landscape as payers are becoming more and more familiar with the therapeutic area and there is more competition. So how do you set yourself apart and continue to ensure that patients will have coverage? So as we get into the next slide, we cover the few key focus areas and trends that are really shaping the oncology access landscape. So first and foremost, as we all know, and this is not just for oncology alone, but across most therapeutic areas, there's really a significant payer scrutiny on high prices. The equation tends to be simple. You're looking at cost of developing a product, cost of making the product, and cost of getting the product out there. But the pathway is really complex, and even more so complex for oncology. For some of these more innovative treatments, such as CAR T and gene therapy, the cost to develop and distribute is significantly greater and therefore leads to a higher price. So manufacturers need to understand how to navigate that pathway and really find ways to ease that burden. The second piece to really consider is alternative payment models. And to really incentivize sort of overall reduction in cost of care, we're actually seeing payers and providers entering into joint risk-sharing agreements. I think I believe in 2018, over 50% of oncology practices reported participation in an APM. Now, while value-based contracting as a concept is very rare today in oncology, competition within indications will actually lead to greater access and greater contracting. The areas in which manufacturers are likely to see competition and contract for right now is breast, renal, lung, and prostate, but that will likely expand in the future as competition increases. We're also seeing that in some areas with annuity or installment payer models, where in which payment for therapies is spread out over a prolonged period of time and might be tied to outcomes. So it's something to consider for a lot of oncology products for today and in the future. This ultimately relates to distribution and site of care as well. As certain products have specific requirements, especially when you're looking at those innovative products, how do you effectively plan for the chain and product flow, ensuring stability, but then also take cost into account? Who faces the burden for these costs, and how can you reduce the burden on the system and the patient as a whole? These are significant elements to consider and things to plan for during a launch. And I know Anne spoke to a lot of this in great deal as well when we were talking about, gene therapy and some of our innovative therapies coming to market. We're also seeing, and this has been a trend, seeing scientific guidelines really driving prior authorization parameters. Incorporating guideline updates in your launch timeframe can really help establish credence with payers and also ensures, a seamless selection process with physicians. Guidelines don't just have to be at a large scale, such as NCCN. We're also seeing, oncology networks and hospital networks and having physicians develop their own guidelines and pathways. So how do you confirm that your product is favorably positioned in those elements? Given the high cost and insurance challenges, having a clear prior auth pathway established is really essential for oncology launches. And sort of tied to that as well, it's really imperative to ensure that your site of care and center of excellence is skilled at navigating these prior auth pathways for patients. Oftentimes, it's a lot of documentation and a lot of challenges, so making sure that they're prepared and educated on how to work through this pathway and ensure that the patient can get the product and pay for the product is really critical. Finally, we also see that payers are looking for greater clinical endpoints, and more significant data. We've seen the trend and shift from looking at PFS to overall survival, and ultimately in some areas, payers are also looking at mets-free survival, specifically in prostate cancer. So how do you continue to evolve the landscape here and ensure that payers are educated and informed around the most significant clinical parameters? Overall, not only is access becoming, a bit more challenging, but clearly oncology products have some clear, unique differentiators to consider when planning for a launch and are very different from other launches that we've seen. At this point, we kind of like to understand what might be concerning for you as you're planning for a launch, and I'll pass the controls back over to Sonia to moderate our questions.
Thank you very much, Swathi. We are actually going to go to our second poll question. And just like we did before, I'm going to launch it and it'll appear right on your screen. And I'll give you about 45 seconds to complete this poll question. And there it is in front of you. And the question is, what are the biggest areas of concern for your launch? So please select one of the below. We have access, regulatory approval and label, manufacturing issues, competition, resource constraints, and getting everything done. So please go ahead and cast your vote. Your participation is encouraged and very much welcomed. Okay, looks like we have the majority of our members have done so. So thank you very much for that. I'll give another 10 seconds for the remaining members of our audience to cast their votes, and then I will close the polls and share the results. Okay, thank you everyone for participating. I'm now going to close the polls and share the results. Okay, so the question was, what are the biggest areas of concern for your launch? And we have here 48% at access, 13% at regulatory approval and label, 4% at manufacturing issues, 9% at competition, and 26% at resource constraints and getting everything done. So thank you everyone for participating in that last poll question. Now I return the mic back to our presenters, and I believe it's Anne, or is it Swathi?
It's Swathi.
That's Swathi. There you go, Swathi.
Perfect. Thank you, Sonia. And frankly, that question was really timely because we see that getting everything done is a very clear challenge for many people. So we'd like to spend the rest of our time really focusing on, de-risking and accelerating a launch. What does that look like? What have we seen in the past, and how can we set you up for success? So if we move on to the next slide, I just wanted to set the stage a little bit to really understand the time parameters that we're working with. In the past 5 years alone, not only have our oncology approvals increased, but the amount approved with only phase 1 or phase 2 data has also amplified. We're also looking at indications here, but what this ultimately sets the stage for is that we're having more and more shortened timeframes to really prepare for a launch and efficiently have that 12, 18, 24-month timeframe to pull together a really comprehensive and fully thought out launch plan. So how do you continue to do that, with these shortened timeframes? If we get into the next slide, I actually, wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about a scenario that we see pretty frequently. Oncology happens to be one of, the unique areas where we see more and more partnerships, more and more co-promote, and more co-commercialization, partnerships set up as well. So how do you navigate that? What does that look like? And how do you prepare for success, given that you now have double the amount of cooks in the kitchen? So what we recently, worked on was an oncology co-promote that was established 3 months ahead of pre-PDUFA. So we have very limited time frame, very limited commercial readiness planning, and ultimately also very little market shaping had been done to date. Realistically, when you're looking at having all of your, educators and your MSLs in market, really educating your core KOLs and key KOLs, all of that had been a bit stagnated just given the resources that the firm had at the time. So we were really entering into this a lot of risk set ahead within the stage. So one was really creating the plan and creating a plan amongst 2 firms and ensuring that decisions were aligned, because a lot of that can ultimately delay activity. And when you're looking at 3 months, that's not a lot of time to get everything done. The second piece was really maintaining focus on critical activities. So it's really easy to get bogged down by the details, but one thing that we saw was really crucial was to ensure that all of the critical pieces for launch were completed, and then we could focus on other parameters later on. And I'll talk a little bit about that in the lesson piece. And then the third, obviously, was launching without market shaping. How can we continue to shape the market as we launch and grow from that? So a lot of the lessons that we learned were really, first and foremost, to develop an aligned strategy and aligned messaging, and ultimately an aligned approach that contains governance and a full RACI process. The second piece was really developing a prioritized phased launch activity plan. Everyone wants to plan for their greatest launch and wants to get everything out of the gate, but sometimes the best approach might be, how can we phase this in segments so that, we're doing the best that we can, and we're also providing the most beneficial pieces to patients at the time that they need it. So getting access to a product and setting up a patient support program and patient access might be more critical day one versus having the DTC or the flashy ads or having the bells and whistles later on in the year when you have time to plan for that as well. So it's really imperative to create that phased launch approach. And then finally, one piece that we saw was also to create and establish an efficient tracking process. A lot of times there is misalignment amongst, 2 firms as far as what does success look like, which really impacts how the field teams are operating as well, if they're expected to partner. So how do we come together and define clear KPIs and define clear measures of success and move forward from there? So if we can go to the next slide, we'll chat through some of the key commercial readiness planning elements that we find are really critical to set the stage for. And I'll let Vivian kind of talk us through some of this as well.
Yeah, there are very key elements, and they make a lot of sense if we start from the left here. So, really understanding our insights, really understanding what's going on in the landscape, but taking that and developing a compelling strategy. It's so important to understand where the gaps exist and how will we meet those gaps with our strategy. We take that strategy and can develop that into a comprehensive and integrated plan. With oncology, you really need to identify, where are those areas where we can customize that plan? What does the patient need? What do our stakeholders need? And how can we ensure that our plan, based on our gap analysis, makes sense and meets them where they are? Additionally, within oncology, where are the risks? Can we identify them? Do we know where they lie? What are the multiple paths to approval? And how do we mitigate and understand those scenarios? So that risk identification and mitigation strategy element is crucial for oncology. And then, with that, how will we track? How will we measure? What will success look like for us, when we launch? And then finally, and I think this is important for any launch, is just effective decision-making and effective ability to, get through some of these elements for planning. If we go to the next slide, we'll dive a little bit deeper here to that launch planning process. Having a plan to, check against and having timely decision-making and understanding what are your long-term tactics and how do those long-term tactics impact the planning around them to ensure you can meet speedy deadlines and early, early expected approval. So, what is the need for the launch? How can we customize it for the organization? And, that customization needs to include, what the indication needs, what the resources are, what the organization needs, and of course, what the product needs. And establishing a governance that works for everyone and having that customization is really critical for success. And I would even ask Anne here if there's anything you would add that you've learned in your many launches for the launch planning process.
Yeah, a lot. We can't underestimate the need to have a really comprehensive plan, taking the time to build it, but then more importantly, review it and update it along the way in a way that doesn't feel cumbersome, but more fluid. Because, in many of these cases, you're building a launch as your company is growing and you're bringing on new people with great ideas and things to add. And there's opportunities to refine your plan along the way. So thinking to your prior slide, I think one of the things that you had called out as what's really important for readiness planning is effective decision making. I would argue that if you have a great plan and if you've got good discussions taking place, that accelerates your decision making all throughout the process. So, the other thing I would just say is, again, the contingency planning cannot be spoken about enough, especially in oncology. You have to prepare to have some sort of curveball thrown at you. It's going to happen. It's happened to me so many times. So just thinking through what if scenario could look like, plan for it. Don't assume it's not going to happen, because most of the time it probably will.
Thank you, Anne. Yeah, some great insights. I know you've experienced this a lot. If we go to the next slides, we've worked with Anne in the past. We enjoy working with her. We're so happy that she was here with us today to speak about oncology launches. We are an experienced partner. We've supported launches in over 70 launches we've participated in now. We can help to bring that insight to help uncover those risks. We bring that experience for building a plan, can work with you to customize it to your needs, and hopefully help you to accelerate and to help you make sure that you identify those critical points and, allowing you to be able to meet those needs and get your product to market, to the patients. If we go to the next slide, Hirschbiegel specializes in product launch preparation, but we also support teams that are launching for specific projects in commercial and marketing excellence and medical affairs and educating the market, and as well as market access and some of the needs there. I know this group has a lot of concerns about market access, and we would love to work with you on, how we can help your team with those issues. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining. I'd like to thank, Anne and Swathi. If we go to the next slide, if you have additional questions, if there's anything else that we can help you with or help your organization with, please contact us. Swathi can be contacted at Swathi@Hirschbiegel. I can be contacted at Vivian@Hirschbiegel. If you'd like more information, please go to our website or find us on LinkedIn. This has been a wonderful opportunity for us to show you our knowledge, and please contact us as you need to, and we'd be happy to answer questions.
Well, thank you very much, Vivian, for that. Actually, thank you, Vivian, Swathi, and Anne, for that very insightful presentation. I hope everyone enjoyed it. We have a bunch of questions that have come in, but unfortunately, we'll only be able to take maybe one question. So let's begin with that. So I just want to let our audience know they continue sending in their questions right now, because the team may follow up with you afterwards. But let's start with our first question here. So Vivian, Anne, and Swathi, are you ready? And the question is, what are some key risks to watch out for in an alliance launch?
Sure. I can definitely take a stab at this, and I'll try and keep it short since I know we're running a little low on time. Aside from, a lot that we discussed earlier, just around making sure you had a clear strategy and everything was aligned, I think one key thing to watch out for is always your review process. Planning for that in advance. Do you have resources going through 2 different companies? Do you have it going through a joint review committee? Setting up and establishing that process we find is very critical upfront to make sure that you have a clean process when launch is actually imminent and occurring. I think that would be a learning that we had from some of the alliance management launches that we worked on.
Okay, thank you very much, Swati. Well, thank you very much for those questions. We have reached the end of the question and answer portion of the webinar. If we couldn't attend to your questions, the team at Hirschbiegel Consulting may follow up with you after this presentation. Now, if you have any further questions, please direct them to the email addresses that's on your screen, and there it is in front of you. So thank you again for everyone for participating in today's webinar. You will be receiving a follow-up email from X-Talks with access to the recorded archive for this event. A survey window will be popping up on your screen. Your participation is appreciated as it will help us to improve on our further webinars. Now, I'm about to send you a link in your chat box. You'll be able to view the recording of this event at that link, and also share this link with your colleagues when they register for the recording as well. So I encourage you to do that. Now, please join us in thanking our speakers, Vivian Ho, Manager, and Swati Rangan, Senior Manager, both with Hirschbiegel Consulting, and Ann Brooks, Vice President of Marketing at Iovance Biotherapeutics, Inc., for that very insightful and timely presentation. We hope you found this webinar informative. It has been my pleasure to be your webinar moderator. On behalf of the team here at X-Talks, we thank you for joining us. I'm Sonia Hunt. Until next time, please take care and bye for now.